So, afternoon everyone. I'm hoping you can see and hear me as well as see the screen. So, I'm Professor Pam Davis, and my colleague Professor Mike Rowe was supposed to be presenting today alongside with me, but unfortunately Mike's poorly today, so I'm afraid you're stuck with me. The title of today's presentation is Innovations in Policing Domestic Abuse, Understanding Success to Build Capacity. So Mike was actually the small grant holder on this, and I worked with him on the project, along with colleagues Paul Biddle from Northumbria University and Donna Marie Brown from Durham. We've presented these findings from this project on many occasions, and so I really do hope that I'm not going to bore some of you rigid. We were lucky enough to secure funding, and I think it was in the second round of the small research grants in 2017-2018. So what I'm going to do today is share with you briefly some of the key findings, but perhaps even more importantly, I want to reflect a little on police academic partnerships and what we've been thinking about since engaging and embarking on the project in 2017, and since finishing it and completing it and writing up various reports, as well as academic peer review articles. So for those of you present at this morning's session, you will have seen Nicole Westmoreland showing a short video extract from the collaborative work between ourselves as academic HEIs on policing domestic abuse as well. So in terms of this being a collaborative project between ourselves as N8 HEIs with police, it's also part of a bigger project, if you like. So this is just one small component. In terms of background to the study, what was then fairly recent HMIC reports of 2014 and 2015 provided indications at the time of some of the severe and limitations of police service responses to victims, in particular, of domestic abuse. Now, of course, HMIC is HMIC-FRS since I think around about 2017. But at that point in time, certainly the police response was still reasonably dismal, although those HMIC reports also indicated pockets, if you like, of good practice and some considerable innovation in terms of policy and practice. And within the N8 area alone, police services, amongst other things, had created all sorts of different kinds of innovations, specialist posts, training packages, civil and legal remedies were on the go. A whole plethora of different innovations were around. Now, the central idea of our project at the time was for academics and police officers and civil police staff to work collaboratively to identify areas in which innovation had been successful. So rather than focusing on the poor practice, the weak practice, we thought for a change it would be quite nice to focus on something a bit more positive and identify those small pockets of innovation that seemed to be particularly successful. And we wanted to develop deeper and richer understanding of those, and in particular, the enabling circumstances. So how we might learn from those particular successful innovations and what it was about them that allowed them to be successful, so that we could help build capacity in other police services. I'm not going to say too much about the methodology, but I'm happy to answer any questions on this. But to be included as partners and collaborators, the police initiatives that were deemed to have been successful had to have an evidence base for their success. So in order to qualify as partners, as collaborators with us, they had to have some kind of evidence to support their claim for success. That could be formal evaluations by outsiders. It could be a reasonably robust internal statistical evidence. But nevertheless, there had to be some sort of evidence in support of the claim for success. Two broad questions were to be addressed. First of all, what were the key contextual features of each that allowed positive impact, and what challenges were experienced, and how were they overcome? And secondly, how can other police forces mirror that innovation in a way that was most likely to ensure that the impact would be replicated, albeit in a different location, a different area of practice. So it took us quite a significant amount of time in order to establish those partners. And the main reason being that the criteria for inclusion was proving quite problematic, quite challenging for us to agree on between the academic provider and the police services. So this notion of having some kind of evidence base for success was almost proved a stumbling factor right at the early stage. So it took quite a while for us to find our police partners. And I'll say a bit more about that later on. So the three partners that we ended up working with were West Yorkshire, North Yorkshire, and Northumbria. So in terms of findings, we found a number of keys to success, 4 of which are listed on this slide. And I will briefly talk through each of these in a moment, but I just want to remind the audience that we were focusing on the policing of domestic abuse. The policing of domestic abuse, of course, depends heavily, if not entirely, on multi-agency working. So successful policing in this area is contingent upon collaborative and partnership working. And in the introduction this morning at this conference, Adam Crawford and Mike stressed the importance of leadership development across public and private and third sectors. They stress the importance of police leadership and development across organisational boundaries. And our own reflections on this project, standing back from the results that we found in 2018, our own reflections on our project would very much wholeheartedly agree with those points. The importance of leadership development across public, private sectors and organisational boundaries. Remember, domestic abuse, the policing of domestic abuse is almost entirely reliant on multi-agency partnership working. So in terms of the first keys to success, we've called this a clear, delimited focus. Each of the innovations that we worked with in each of the police force areas didn't have broad, all-encompassing partnerships. They had narrow, fairly narrow, but clearly task and problem-oriented issues to tackle. They had highly focused objectives, which precluded all sorts of deliberation and elongated interagency debate and disagreement. The common purpose was easy to grasp. It was easy for all the different partners, no matter what their organisational priority might be, it was easy for them all to grasp the common purpose and vision of the innovation. So that's one of the important keys to success, and these are not in any particular order. Secondly, complementary partnership and skill sets. The information and expertise that the different professionals from the multi-agency partners bring to addressing these complex issues was seen to add value and even credibility to the projects, so that the initiatives benefited the police was absolutely crucial for buy-in and success. And as just one example, in West Yorkshire, for example, Operation Cowford enabled IDVAs to do more effective risk assessments than they might otherwise have done previously. and more effective safety planning, and so secure disclosure of offences that police reported they otherwise would not have identified. So clear criminal justice outcomes. But equally, partner staff reported positively that they gained from police ability to deal with confrontational situations or potentially confrontational situations, and from data and background information which tended to be regarded as authoritative. So I think this respect for difference at the point of delivery at crucial moments certainly seemed to add value and improved practice. It improved safety for victims and improved knowledge around knowing how to manage offenders more effectively and safely at the same time as wraparound support for victims. Third, access to data. Police information was regarded very highly by partners. They privileged data from the police. They perceived it as particularly definitive and representative of domestic abuse patterns, trends, and hotspots. Partners felt very privileged that they got access to this data, they got access to it very quickly, very swiftly, in real time, such that they could use it to act much more quickly. The flip side of that is data sharing can, of course, as we all know, be problematic. And there were particular problems in one area. And I have to say it was health professionals in the main who tended to hide behind data sharing agreements or hide behind GDPR or provide excuses for not doing something when actually the reality was they were perfectly in a perfect position to be able to share that data. So in the information sharing imperative in real time was crucial to the success of these projects. And fourth, a whole host of issues are collapsed under organisation, leadership and management here. One of the projects was initially Home Office Innovation Fund funded, and that project was seen inside the organisation as outside of mainstream work. So it wasn't, in some ways, like some pet projects, if you like, of individual leaders are doomed to succeed. This one was less so. So it seemed to attract less cultural cynicism within the police, if you like. There was also a solid profile for the innovations internally in terms of staff being allocated proper time, real time, to participate. Clear fixed points of contact. There was a communicated senior management commitment, which was ongoing and constantly stressed. And I think that was important both internally and externally to the police. So that's a very, very quick trog around some of the key findings. Finally, each of the initiatives we were privileged to gain access to were not alien to police occupational culture. That doesn't mean to say they weren't innovative, but they weren't alien to police occupational culture. They were with the grain in terms of being related to police occupational culture. The way in which they had the clear delimited focus, task, problem-orientated focus, relieve pressure on resources. There was seen to be tangible benefits in terms of workloading for the police. Relatively few partners. Where there were too many partners, the partners were reduced so that only the core partners who were engaging and participating and sharing information could be identified. That's really important. And clear operational benefits for all from the partnership working. I just want to end by commenting on our, we've had time to reflect back as authors of the project, Donna Marie, Paul, Mike and myself. Just want to end by commenting on our reflections about the N8 and the co-production of knowledge, and this notion of overcoming institution and sectoral boundaries and effective collaboration. So Adam Crawford this morning talked about co-production, and he stressed this notion of us all having a reformed conception of knowledge. And I think that's something we've particularly grappled and thought hard about. And we've written a paper published in Policing and Society that talks about precisely this: understanding the status of evidence in policing research. And in that paper, we reflect on this N8 project in particular, and on the policing of domestic abuse. I stated at the outset that in order for projects to be included in the project, there had to be the eligibility criteria, if you like, was that there had to be some evidence in support of the claim for success. Now, I also said that it took us quite a while to find partners, because the finding of that evidence was really quite tricky and very illuminating, despite the fact that we relaxed our criteria for what we as academics saw as being evidence, research evidence. So we had quite an elastic definition of evidence. So it took us quite a while to find partners. So the paper that we reflect on discusses this status of evidence and what policing partners and what academic partners constitute as evidence. Police, of course, are constantly working with evidences of all sorts of variety. Academics work with research evidence, but it's not a case of never the twain will meet. But I think there was certainly a learning curve, if you like, in terms of co-production and collaboration and partnership working around what constitutes evidence in this particular context. So Mike Cunningham also in the early session talked about leading change is very difficult. I think that's a direct quote from him. And, you know, we would wholeheartedly agree. In the context of co-production in search of better collaborative partnerships to tackle domestic abuse, the job is never done. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you about your thoughts and have a look at the chat functions so that we can all engage with one another. Sorry, just back to the screen.
So kicking off the discussion, well, hi everyone, I'm Jill from Overlook Associates. And so feel free to share your questions in the Feedloop website chat function, as well as if you have the option to share in the Zoom chat, feel free to share your questions and to generate a bit of a conversation. Pam, it looks like we have our first question here that I just added to the Zoom chat. Are you able to view that?
I can't see the chat functions at the moment.
Okay, yes, so I'll read out. So how do similar organizations who have something to contribute link in with sharing knowledge or success?
Could you repeat the first bit of the question, please, Jill?
Sure, absolutely. How do small organizations have something who have something to contribute link in with sharing knowledge or success?
Good question. I mean, I don't know whether the author of the question is thinking about within the context of being a partner, a multi-agency partner, or whether they're excluded from being a partner. So I think maybe that needs clarifying. But certainly if small organizations are part of partnerships, then they're there to make a contribution, and everyone should have an opportunity to contribute. If they're not part of a multi-agency collaboration, then I mean, what whether other people need to help me out here, I guess. There's all sorts of ways of
Hello. Hi, yeah, it might help if I contextualize the question a little bit, because I've posed the question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Oh, feel free. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, when I say small organization, there's sometimes, if you're in an area like, let's say, Blackburn with Darwin, and some of the work, because we work in a context of a sort of semi-political or cultural context as well, where certain subjects are taboo locally. So to formulate partnerships which work on the basis of a set of limited criteria of, let's say, indicators such as, X number of domestic abuse incidents need to be dealt with, or people need to be supported, and the criteria are that that person must be at crisis. So some of the work we do is around prevention. I mean, I've worked in this field for 30 years as an independent expert, but then when you start putting in a group and you start dealing with LGBT issues and coercion and control and politics and systemic failures, it gets very complicated for people. So we kind of fall out of that easy tick box category.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So it's really hard to then make partnerships with people who want to just keep it simple. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, I think this is where academic partnerships should surely be able to help tremendously. So you're likely to be working in areas where there's a number of different universities that are sharing the same aims and concerns to reduce victimization and to responsibilize perpetrators, to reduce risks and so on, both to adults and children. I mean, do you have those sorts of links with academic partners?
Yes, we do. It's things like the Shiloh Project, which is about rape culture, and obviously locally in Leeds University. So there are partnerships. It's just then taking it to the next level to actually become a partner that can contribute in a meaningful way with resources and funding. And so some of our own thinking can be included into academia.
Yeah, I mean, I think, put the pressure on your academic institution partners and your at individual levels, so that they can help give you that shared voice, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Great. And so we have another question here from Jackie. Jackie, I don't know if you'd like to just share your question, if to unmute, or if you'd like me to read it out, happy to. Oh, it looks like you're still muted there, Jackie. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Hi. It's very similar to just that previous question, really. I think, I've been working in this field for many, many, many years, and there is such great work and great practice, collaborations and alliances out there. And I feel sometimes there's too many. There's lots of what work centres, there's, within policing, let alone within academic partnerships. And I suppose, I think sometimes they can be quite exclusionary and daunting for small, either individuals or small projects to try and navigate through to share their experiences. So I was just interested in how the panel felt about how can we bring some of this national work together to share that landscape and make it easier to navigate through.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy for people to chip in on the chat function, which I can't actually see at the moment, but not to worry. I mean, I'm reluctant to divert people's energies to kind of doing a kind of roadmap or gathering together a kind of dictionary or digest of different provisions, because it's very often the case that once you start doing that job, it very, very quickly becomes out of date. And I think, you know, that can be a whole waste of time, resources and energy. So I think that kind of national mapping is really quite hard to do. And anyway, what makes a difference is what happens at the local level. You know, delivery and working with partners at very, very local level is what for me is crucial in terms of making any kind of multi-agency partnership to tackle domestic abuse and violence work at very local levels, whether that's a very formal arrangement, whether it's a MARAC, whether it's a MATAC, or whether it's a non-legislative form of partnership working that operates very much at grassroots levels. So again, this kind of the confluence or the gap or chasm, if you like, between the national and the local level always needs to be negotiated. And I think, you know, I personally believe in the leadership and monitoring and participation at very, very local level is what's going to make the biggest difference.
Am I okay to come in? It's Karen.
Yeah.
Hi, Karen Byram, Cheshire Police. I would agree with you around that localism, and I think in terms of achieving that partnership work in that localised method is the way to make it most successful. I suppose the bit here around taking things localised but taking what works ideas from other areas is possibly the area that I would say probably needs exploring more. I touched on it a little bit this morning around 43 different localised methods, or even more than that, with each force area having their own local authorities within it. Suggests there's lots of different ways of what works. And I think the first thing that forces do is look at what other people are doing. And when they look at what other people are doing, sometimes to know that those people have chose that method because of some sort of research or academia that's led them that way adds a little bit of weight to the trust around why someone is doing something the way they are. Because sometimes the KPIs and whatever else to say that it's working aren't really the trusted source that others think they are.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree completely. What the N8 project did for us was very much from the outset, it was about understanding success to build capacity, and what works in one area is not necessarily going to be good in terms of uprooting it and transplanting it in exactly the same fashion into a neighbouring force. Whether that's, you know, a direct neighbouring force or at the far-flung end of the country. So I think it's, you know, this transplant business is what we were trying to get over here. What we were looking at is the mechanisms and measures that facilitated that success. So I think at the national level, yes, it's important to identify, and this is where the evidence-based criteria that we used, we were hoping would work more robustly, is at the national level identifying, you know, with very clear, robust evidence-based research, what appears to have worked by both quantitative and qualitative measures, and then take that model and then think about how that can be operationalized in your area. You know, if you don't have the same kinds of partners, or if you have different partners, or if you have, you know, 6 local authorities to work with rather than just 2, how do you then nevertheless take the bones of that successful approach and then use that and transplant it into your area, but in such a way that it remains entirely successful? So that's where the criteria that we found in our project need to be adhered to across the board, but then tailored towards the very, very local level. So it's hard work, hard work. So if anyone else would like to contribute to the chat on the website or via Zoom, do unmute yourselves if you'd like to participate or correspond with one another in the chat functions. Jill, would you like to invite any other additional questions?
Well, it looks like, oh, yeah, go right ahead.
Yes, so I've just written a question. I'm sort of interested in your comments about struggling to find projects that had evidence of success.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm interested in that is that I'm looking at how the N8 can assist analytical resources within policing to be effective, so that actually police analysts can be used to add to the evidence base, which I'm not sure is always the case, partly because of how they're used by senior police officers, but also more probably than that they haven't got the skills. And I just wondered whether with the projects you did find, was it the analytical skills that helped to create that evidence base, and what do you think could be done to improve the capacity within police forces themselves to be able to actually have evidence of success?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different levels of response to that question, I think. In terms of analytical resources in the projects that we looked at, it varied significantly between the three that we ended up focusing on. And I think one of them, the Northumbria one, was an externally commissioned evaluation. So I think it was perhaps a little bit easier for them to claim the evidence base. However, even within that external evaluation, and I can speak with experience here because I was part of that evaluation, we relied quite significantly on the analytical resources within that police service to provide us with data. So that's the case for one of the projects. The other two projects, much less so. And I think this speaks volumes to the sort of the professional culture of policing, if you like, in that, you know, we all know that individual police officers can be shunted around and moved around different areas of police work, and are expected and often become instant experts. So I think that that's another level of kind of way of responding to your question, if you like, is that it can be quite tricky, particularly with police staff, to ensure that those professional research skills are maintained and honed, because you're constantly working with different personnel. And I think that's different in terms of the civil staff. You know, I spent 5 years being what was then called a civilian researcher, that kind of career path in the police, I think, has changed significantly since the early 90s and has become much more professionalized. A lot of the research is done more now in-house with less external commissioning in some cases. So I think there's huge capacity for civil staff and additional use of analytical resources amongst civil staff that already exist. But of course, those staffing bases vary significantly from police force to police force. And I think, you know, there's room for a tripartite arrangement between academic HEIs and academic research staff, civil staff, and operational police staff too. So I can't quite remember what the second part of your question was about. But
Well, I think you have answered it
Yeah.
to a certain extent. I mean, I was wondering how much they were involved in the projects you did finally find, and then, you know, if you had any ideas for ensuring that forces use analyst skills to actually build an evidence base, perhaps rather than just presenting data.
I do
which
think that
sometimes is how they're
I
used.
do think sometimes those resources are underused. Yeah. In police force, absolutely. Yeah.
So I just wanted to highlight 2 comments. Jackie shared the Cambridge Center of Evidence-Based Policing do a great course for police analysts looking at domestic abuse and violence research and evidence-based work. It looks like it's now online and a great resource for forces to train up analysts in these skills. I just wanted to share that in case other folks don't have that chat option. And then Pam, it looks like there was just one of the folks who are attending missed where you said they could access the article about your research.
Okay, so we've reflected on understanding the status of evidence in policing in a recent article in Policing and Society, the journal Policing and Society.
Perfect. Great, thanks. So does anyone have any additional questions to ask Pam or anyone else attending the group, either via Zoom chat or through the website, or feel free to unmute and share if
I don't know if Donna Marie may well be in the audience. I don't want to put her on the spot, but if she'd like to add anything to our overall reflections, she's very welcome to.
Doesn't look like she is available there. And it doesn't look as though, Pam, it doesn't look as though there are any other questions coming through the Zoom chat or through the website.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for listening. Appreciate that.